Thank you everyone for joining me today. My name is Aron. I'm a research associate and team coordinator at ALLFED, or to spell it out, the Alliance to Feed the Earth in Disasters. And if you want to connect with me, just follow the link allfed.info/EAGxWarsaw 2023. And yeah, let's get going. So today I will cover, first of all, the risks we are concerned about, and tell you a bit more about ALLFED, our team, and what we're doing. And then I will show you some of the results of our latest research in an integrated model. And in the end, I'll tell you about opportunities to come work with us and beyond. So let's get started with some risk in the world. Please, everyone, just come in. That have a chance to disrupt a significant part of our global food production. Here on the left, on the scale of, say, maybe 1% of our global food production, we have regional events like storms destroying yields or smaller regional heat waves. And then we get to more extreme events. So there we have, say, volcanic eruptions or maybe supply chain disruptions from pandemics or multiple extreme weather events in the same year, say a flooding over one continent, a heat wave in a second, and maybe forest fires in other disruption in a third. So these have a chance to disrupt, say, 10% or more of our global food production in a year, which would be quite significant. We haven't really seen something like that in over like 200 years. And last time it was a volcanic eruption, Mount Tambora in Indonesia, which changed rain patterns across the world for a while. And on this extreme end, scenarios that have a chance to wipe out almost all of our food production, there we have an asteroid or a comet impact, a super volcanic eruption, or a nuclear war leading to a nuclear winter, which is the major line of research I will talk about today. And I want to briefly also mention we are also interested in loss of industry scenarios, as a lot of our fertilizer and modern agriculture relies on technological solutions. So let's go more into depth into these large-scale catastrophes. And here they have one thing in common, and that is they are abrupt sunlight reduction scenarios. So all of these scenarios, be it a comet, a volcanic eruption, or a nuclear war, have the potential to emit or make loft a lot of soot high into the atmosphere. So we have dark particles that then have a chance to block out parts of the sunlight, and therefore having a global cooling effect as a result. And I want to explain this risk a bit more detail or visualize it. Here we have graphics from a team around the Alan Roebuck, or from researchers around the Alan Roebuck team. And what we're looking at here at the top left is the temperatures in the world after 1 year after a full-scale nuclear war. This is kind of the worst-case scenario. In this research area, we'll talk about how much soot is in the atmosphere, and this is a 150 teragram scenario, which is kind of the worst case if, say, over 4,000 nukes would be used and several cities would go up in firestorms. And I want to highlight a thing here. The white line you might see, that is the line of frost, and this is a picture out of the climate models in June, so in the northern hemisphere summer. So us here in Warsaw, we might be frozen over, right? And it's quite the contrast. Right now, if we go outside, we have almost 30 degrees or something. So this would be quite a significant different world. And in addition, also, the precipitation patterns around the world would change. It would rain less, and we would have higher humidity. That would be a large impact for all our rain-irrigated agriculture. So areas in which we do not have artificial irrigation systems placed would struggle. And in addition, the amount of sunlight that would arrive on the surface would also be reduced. So all of these three would have a major impact on our conventional agriculture. And here in the left, you can see different types of nuclear war or nuclear winter scenarios, like depending on the amount of soot that reaches high into the atmosphere. Oh yeah, before I forget, why is the high into the atmosphere a critical part? At a certain point, it doesn't rain down anymore, and then it can stay there for years. And that you can see here as well. So after, this is years after the catastrophe occurred, in this scenario would be a nuclear war. Yeah, and it takes about like 2 years maybe when the soot then spreads all across the world. So this is definitely a global effect, no matter where these firestorms would have occurred. And here on the y-axis, we see how much of our global calorie production would be affected. And here in this worst case scenario, it would be in year 3 about like 90%, which would roughly translate to like a 80% global fatality rate. So this would be like 6 billion people at risk of starvation and death or famine. This is the risk we are looking at. And yeah, you might wonder, okay, why do we work on this? Why, because we at ALLFED look at solutions. How can we even feed everyone this scenario? Why don't we prevent it in the first place? And that is a very natural thought. And I think also I encourage everyone who's working nuclear security to work on this. But the thing is, on each steps, there's a chance, right, that it cascades, gets worse, that we might have collapse of critical systems or parts of our civilization. That's why we think it's very valuable to also look at responses. And some of these things might yet be beyond our control, say, such as a supervolcanic eruption. And yeah, this graph is from a paper which also Anders Sandberg, who is walking around here, has co-written. And how did this get started? So, which is kind of a funny story. In 2015, our founder, David Denkenberger, before that, he read a book about the asteroid impacts. And in the book, the author mentioned, well, if an asteroid would hit Earth today, everyone would die out, but the mushrooms would flourish. And he thought for himself, well, why don't we eat the mushrooms and don't go extinct, right? So that started all out, and that's why I'm here today. Back then, he did a very rough estimate of a lot of different food solutions, could we turn the dead biomass, the trees into sugar, and did rough calculations. And from that, after 2 years later, another co-founder found this book, and ALLFED, the Alliance to Feed the Earth in Disasters, got founded. And yeah, some of the solutions back then we're still very excited about. Some we have dismissed as not that cost effective anymore. But yeah, this was our starting point. Nowadays we have several board members supporting us in our cause. You might know a few of them. If you're interested in seeing the full list and their backgrounds, go to allfed.info. And yeah, we're a remote working team all across the world, which is very interesting, makes fun for scheduling team meetings, but it's also very interdisciplinary and fun. So this is including volunteers. Slightly out of date, our founder, David Denkenberger, is not in Alaska anymore. He's now in New Zealand. So from the most northern place to the most southern place, kind of. So we like extremes at ALLFED. But yeah, we sometimes do get together. This was a few weeks ago. We met together for a lot of people for the first time, not seeing each other in a laptop camera setup for a recent team retreat. But yeah, that is roughly about us as a team. But what are the solutions we are looking into? So first, we're trying to understand the scenarios, the impacts on the food system. And we've written about that, especially in the early days, and looking more into solutions. So for example, we call them resilient foods. And characteristics of resilient foods are that they are quickly scalable and work in these different conditions, right? It might be a reduced sunlight or a very cold environment. And single-cell protein, for example, those are microorganisms that feast on carbon sources such as natural gas or CO2. And we can turn that into protein powder that doesn't require, for example, any sunlight. And that would be I guess, an industrialized modern version of producing food. But for example, I recently co-authored a paper where we looked at the capability of scaling seaweed production, and that would actually grow very well, even in a nuclear winter scenario. But we also look at other things such as potatoes. Everyone loves potatoes because they actually don't mind, say, a single night of frost. That's why we could still grow them, even in these extreme scenarios, say, around the tropics. These are the solutions we are looking into. Just quick shout out because we're here at EAGx, and there's a lot of different course areas active here and people looking at different ways to impact the world. And yeah, I really enjoy, or like, it's interesting to see the overlap between like single cell proteins with the alternative protein community, but there's also like the resilient foods from our side, or people looking at like existential risk bunkers. So a bit for everyone. So yeah, what have we done so far since the early book, which I can also show and give around in a moment. We've done an analysis or a paper, like we always publish, or not always, but mostly publish peer-reviewed papers, and have looked into like, okay, can we actually get a nutritious diet out of these resilient food solutions, where we created a catalog so far. We have done preliminary analysis about the affordability of these foods and have narrowed down the uncertainty ranges that were there initially. So I want to now come to a very specific example, one of our papers that's currently in peer review, and the preprint you can find on our webpage, and that's our integrated model. So in there, I want to first describe how does the world look like, our food system, before catastrophe, and we are roughly producing around like 5,500 kilocalories per person per day, globally speaking, of which a significant part goes to like animal feed and biofuels. Excuse me. And some parts are lost, just like from the processing. And here you can roughly see how that translates to the average diet around the world. And yeah, the research came out there recently from the people who also did the climate models that in a nuclear winter scenario, this worst case 150 teragram scenario, that number would go down to 1,200 calories per person per day, which would mean a fatality rate of like around 80%. So this is, yeah, a huge challenge, right? Like, how can we talk about feeding everyone with such a major disruption to our food system?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Do you know what kind of nuclear catastrophe that scenario like talks about? Is it like 1,000 nuclear weapons, or 100, or 10?
We can go into detail there at the end. I guess from the climate impacts on agriculture, what's only important is, well, not only, but primarily important, how much soot gets lofted into the atmosphere. There's a lot of dependency of like which cities would be attacked, how much burnable materials. There's uncertainty in those models. We can very happy after this talk to go into more detail there. For all intents and purposes, you could also say, okay, we're looking at a super volcanic eruption, which would have a similar, or could have a similar climatic impact. But 150 teragrams would be a full-scale nuclear war with, say, around 4,000 nukes being used globally. But yeah, so this is the challenge we're looking at. And what could we do? One natural or thing that often comes to mind is, well, how much food do we even have stored? Could we prepare ahead of time? So roughly right now we have, globally speaking, 3 to 6 months. Kind of depends when harvests are. And yep, we could maybe ration that to a full year. But this will not right now save us from these consequences or prevent death from famines. And there's a challenge. There's already food insecurity in the world today, quite a bit. And if we would now start stockpiling food, that would increase food prices by quite a bit and would then also be a challenge. So there's like hard trade-offs here to make and no easy answers, and also would cost trillions of dollars. That's why we are at ALLFED looking at very rapid, scalable solutions that would work when such a catastrophe hits, or we're aware of, say, next year's harvest is disrupted. So I have to look at time. But okay, what kind of resources do we have available even in this most dire scenario? We do have, well, a lot of forms of biomass and carbon sources. So what can we do with them? We have created an integrated model. The code you can find online. Feel free to join us or like comment if you have any questions or play around with the numbers. We would love feedback. We're trying to make it more readable as well by commenting on the code. But yeah, we have 3 models that feed into it. So on the one side, how much of the conventional food system is still working. So these parts are majorly inspired by the studies I cited earlier on the other slides. But in addition, we have also our own research. It's like, okay, how much additional greenhouses could we produce in a year? How much industrial food solutions could we scale up? Another one there, for example, is sugar from biomass, such as trees. And one thing we could, for example, do is take a paper factory and retrofit it to produce sugar instead. It's like already has like 80% of the components ready, because what you need is very fine-grained or milled wood, and then you add enzymes that break it down. So that might be an industrial food solution. And very conventional things we can do. We can edible food that's currently being used as fodder for feedstock or livestock. We could switch there, like eat the corn and wheat ourselves, and make sure that our livestock is grass-fed, and we could reduce the amount that goes to biofuels and generally be more careful about food waste. So those are the things we could do. And the model then creates 6 scenarios. On the one side, we have the baseline. We just want to make sure, does it put out things that are comparable to what we see in the world today, with trade and without. And the important part with trade is each country has like different resources. So we want to really understand how things are connected there. And so we get to these different scenarios. And I will have some more maps here for you in a second. So first of all, how would the world look like after a nuclear war? Like this is what we said earlier, like that the majority of our conventional food production is disrupted. And that would mean that we can, with very simple adaptations like reduce food waste, we could maybe meet 30% of global caloric needs. And I'll have a sip of water while you look at that graph.
Sorry, maybe I can ask in the meantime, is like when you're saying that there's a nuclear war, do you assume that the population remains as is? You just assume the contamination in the atmosphere? Because when you're saying we can only cover...
To repeat the question out loud, do we assume the same amount of population after the scenario? Yes, there would be fatalities, which are not included in this model. This is one simplification of, okay, the amount of people unfortunately hit by the scenario in the first case are roughly equal to the amount of infrastructure disrupted. So that is one assumption, the model, and you can enter different numbers there if you feel like doing. But yeah, we also want to look now and explain this graph a bit more in detail. I know it has a lot of content, so just briefly here, the colors at the bottom that we scale up over time, those are the different food facilities that we would then try to ramp up in such a scenario. So that might be the cellulosic sugar, so that's like turning trees into sugar, or building single-cell protein facilities. And those, as you can see, would need like a year to 2 years to come into full production. But the strong message here is if we apply all these resilient food solutions globally, we could meet over 100%, even like 147% of our global calorie needs. And in addition, also like at least all our macronutrients, calories, fat, and protein would be covered. And yeah, this is on the one side like very promising, but it's far from guaranteed to succeed, right? Like we have not yet done the pilot testing. Like, could we actually scale up these food facilities with that speed? we have not made, or like there's still R&D missing some of these food solutions. We don't know, like, okay, they might be novel. Is it safe to eat 20% of the calories daily? Or if it's a limit maybe at 5%? And what are the challenges for countries to cooperate and trade with each other? Because I want to show a few more maps while that is important. So this is what we look like, what the world looks like today. And you can see there are already a lot of countries that without trade would not be able to meet all of their caloric needs. And this would, in a nuclear winter scenario, be way worse. Basically, the only regions that seem to be fine are Argentina and Australia. But say even without, like, this is one result of the model. With resilient foods, the world already looks way better. So, but still, we only get to meet like 80% of our calories. And not all regions are equally productive or have the same capacities. Please, after the presentation. Because if we now, for example, look at USA and India, both of them, could meet their caloric demands. But it's like very close cut for India, whereas the US could produce their requirements many times over. That's why we want to advocate also for trade and cooperation in these scenarios. And this could be like a huge humanitarian effort in this case. Very briefly, just because I mentioned at the start, why is loss of industry important? Because basically everything is interconnected in our modern world, like banking, governments, fossil fuels, oil and gas refineries, water and transportation. And what are the three scenarios? This is like our second line of research. I don't have examples for research there, but I just want to highlight this. This could be like caused by a narrow AI, cyber attack, or virus shutting down critical parts of the power grids, or an extreme solar storm disrupting our infrastructure. And the same goes for an HEMP, which is a high altitude electromagnetic pulse, which would, without going into too much detail here, basically if you take a nuke and detonate it very, very high above the surface, say at like several hundred kilometers above the surface, it could cause an electromagnetic impulse. And some studies have calculated that, say, one of those 1 megaton nukes could like basically disrupt the electricity all over Europe, like over a whole continent, one of those alone. So those are the risks there. Feel free to find more about them on our webpage. Now, very briefly, wrapping this up, where are we going? We need more work in our like political analysis, the assumptions maybe around trade, and help in creating of government response plans. In addition, we want to further our economic analysis. What are the impacts on food prices and markets? Where would they still exist? Under which conditions? And very briefly, because I just got the 1 minute sign, we are hiring. So there are several positions. We have general research associates because our work is by nature very interdisciplinary. We need data scientists. So if you feel like working with Python or GeoPandas for like spatial data, like the model you saw earlier, help with that project, that would be very much appreciated. But we are also looking for policy associates that can help us set up government response plans and engage in communication there, where we're currently having some very promising conversations. And in addition, if you want to go to New Zealand, David is on a rolling basis hiring engineering PhDs, and we are looking for a senior communications consultant. With that being said, I thank you very much for your attention. Again, this is a link if you want to connect with me. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Aron. We have time for one question.
I saw your hand.
Yeah, so in the event of a global catastrophe, your work obviously would be very, very valuable. I wonder to what degree are you trying to apply your solutions also to currently existing challenges?
Fantastic. I think there's a lot of like dual purpose activity here, right? Like all the solutions that would work in the most extreme scenarios could also be scaled down for smaller, quote unquote, food shocks. We're engaging, say, with ministries, undersecretaries, and like trying to. Often it's like stage 0 is getting them to acknowledge these risks, and then scenario exercises, getting resilience into the food system today is definitely something we try to achieve. But we are very much focused, or like in addition to that, we're focused on the neglected areas. Well, because they're neglected. Okay, sorry. That's. Hope that was clear. Okay, time for one more, or that's it. Yeah, thank you very much. You can find me outside, I guess.